She thought it was just a wrong number, a stranger's voice in the middle of the night. But that call dragged her into the world of Viktor Petrov, the man who owned half of Eastern Europe and every secret buried in her past. From stolen identities to forbidden love, from blood-soaked power to a bond that defied every rule. This isn't just a love story, it's a story of survival, obsession, and a woman who must choose freedom or the man who would burn the world to keep her. But before we dive into today's journey, tell me, where are you watching me from? The night at Splendor shimmered with the kind of perfection Lena had learned to mimic. Soft jazz pulsed from hidden speakers, glassware chimed like tiny bells, and laughter drifted between tables like smoke. She moved through it all in silence, elegant, invisible, precise. Every plate, every pour, every smile rehearsed, until it didn't feel like hers anymore. That was the secret to survival here. Don't be noticed. But fate doesn't warn you before it looks up. When Viktor Dragan walked in, the air shifted. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim, as if the room understood who had arrived. He wasn't the kind of man you introduced yourself to. He was the kind of man you recognized. The name whispered among staff, half awe, half warning. Owner of the restaurant, investor. Something darker too, but no one dared define it. He didn't come often. But when he did, the world obeyed. Lena felt it before she saw him. That pressure in her chest, that instinct that made her straighten her back and slow her breathing. He took the head seat at the private table near the window, flanked by his men, silent, watchful, tailored in black. He didn't need to speak to command attention. His stillness did it for him. Lena was assigned to serve that table. Of course she was. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. Radu, the floor manager, whispered as he passed her, "Be careful, Petron. Don't spill a drop tonight." She smiled faintly, though her hands were already trembling around the wine bottle. As she approached the table, Victor's gaze rose lazily from the menu. Their eyes met, only for a heartbeat. It was enough. Something sharp and cold moved through her, recognition or warning, she couldn't tell. He nodded once. That was permission to exist in his orbit. The dinner unfolded with mechanical grace. Businessmen discussed contracts, numbers, and favors in low voices. Victor said little. He didn't know. Ed, too. He watched, observed, calculated, and occasionally his attention flicked toward her, briefly, like the passing of a shadow across light. Lena kept her distance, pretending not to notice. She thought of her grandmother, Bunica, back in Romania, frail, fading. The only voice that ever made her feel like home still existed somewhere. She'd been saving every tip, every hour, just to afford one more call to the hospice. When her phone buzzed inside her apron pocket, her blood turned to ice. She shouldn't have it on her. It was against policy. But the caller ID, Romania, made her forget everything else. Her heart raced. She looked toward Radu. He was busy near the bar. For just one moment, she turned her back to the dining room and whispered, "Allo?" The doctor's voice was grave. Bunica's condition had worsened. Words blurred. Heart rate unstable. "We're doing everything we can." Lena's throat locked. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, eyes burning. Without thinking, she switched to Italian. It came easier when she panicked. Her voice carried across the polished marble like a ghost breaking through the music. She didn't notice the sudden silence behind her until it was too late. Every conversation had stopped. Every gaze turned toward her. And at the center of it, Viktor Dragan's eyes were fixed on her. Cold, unreadable, calculating. The kind of stare that stripped layers from a soul. She stammered, ending the call. "Grazie, dottore. Vi prego di fare tutto il possibile." Her hand shook as she slipped the phone away. Silence lingered like fog. Somewhere behind her, a glass clinked. Then the low hum of conversation cautiously resumed. But Victor didn't look away. Even as the others spoke, laughed nervously, his gaze stayed on her like an unspoken question. When he finally leaned toward his assistant, his voice was barely audible, but Lena caught it. "Don't let him see." Air leave. Her knees went weak. She finished pouring the last glass of wine with mechanical precision, praying she'd misheard. Her chest ached with the echo of her grandmother's voice, her desperation to go home, and now the heavy awareness that something irreversible had just begun. Minutes felt like hours. The table finished. Victor rose, adjusted his cufflinks, and nodded once to her as he passed. No smile, no expression, just that quiet acknowledgement, like she was already marked. Radu approached her at the end of her shift. "Good work tonight," he said softly. She forced a nod, pretending not to notice two unfamiliar men standing near the entrance, black coats gleaming like polished armor. She slipped into the back room, unclipped her apron, and pressed her forehead against the cold locker door. Her breath trembled. She thought of quitting, just walking out the back and never coming back. Chicago was big enough to disappear in again. She'd done it before. She could do it again. She grabbed her coat and turned off her locker light. Outside, the restaurant had quieted. The last tables were being cleared, the scent of roasted garlic and candle wax lingering in the air. Lena walked toward the clock-out station, eyes fixed on the glowing numbers. Her mind replayed that look, that command. Maybe he said it to someone else. Maybe she imagined it. She wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But when she reached for the door, two shadows blocked her path, tall, expressionless, the same men who'd been watching earlier. "Miss Petron?" one of them asked. His voice was polite, too polite. She froze. "Yes?" The second man stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Mr. Dragan wants a word." Lena's pulse roared in her ears. The empty restaurant suddenly felt too quiet, too narrow, too dangerous. She looked toward the door. Freedom was just 3 steps away, but those men stood between her and the night, and behind them waited the man whose single command could alter the course of her life. "Mr. Dragan wants a word." The words followed her like chains as the lights of Spain. Lindore dimmed behind her, and the door to Victor's private office clicked open. The hallway behind the restaurant smelled faintly of wine and lemon polish. Lena's steps echoed against the marble floor as the two men led her toward the far door. Each step made her chest tighten a little more. She had seen that door before, the one no employee ever entered unless summoned. Behind it lay Victor Dragan's world, and now she was being delivered to it. The taller man opened the door without knocking. Warm light spilled from inside, golden and heavy against the shadows. Victor sat behind a wide mahogany desk, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a single glass of dark liquor beside him. He didn't look up immediately. He was reading something, a file perhaps, or a report. Only when the door closed behind her did he lift his eyes. "Sit," he said simply. His voice carried the same weight as his presence, measured, commanding, quiet enough that disobedience didn't feel like an option. Lena obeyed, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. Her fingers twisted in her lap. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. The silence that followed stretched, filling the room like a second heartbeat. "You speak Italian," he began. His tone was calm, but it wasn't a question. "Yes," she said softly. "And Romanian, and English." He nodded once, still watching her. "And you were born in Brasov, correct? Moved to Seattle when you were 15? Her head jerked up. "How do you—" He didn't smile. "You've been in Chicago 3 years. You live in an apartment above a bakery on Clark Street. Rent past due by 2 months. The words landed like stones. Lena felt her face heat, a wave of disbelief and fear coursing through her. "How do you know that?" she whispered. Victor leaned back in his chair, eyes steady on her. "When someone works under my roof, I prefer to know who they are." "That's not—" she began, but her voice cracked before she could finish. "Necessary?" he finished for her. "Maybe not, but I find necessity and curiosity often overlap." He reached for his glass and took a slow sip. "Tell me about your grandmother." The question hit her harder than the rest. Her throat closed. "She's sick," she managed. "Heart failure. She's all I have left." He nodded, as though confirming something he already knew. "And yet you're here." thousands of miles away. I can't afford to go, she said quietly. Not yet. Victor studied her. His expression was unreadable, part interest, part calculation, and something else she couldn't name. You're fluent in 3 languages, he said finally. You could be more than a waitress. She let out a shaky laugh. I just need a job that pays my bills. Bills are chains, he murmured. And you don't strike me as someone who likes chains. The irony of his words didn't escape her. She looked away, finding solace in the flicker of the fireplace that burned behind him. The flames reflected in the glass shelves lined with books and bottles, each perfectly placed. Nothing in his office was random, not even her presence. Victor set his glass down. The sound was sharp, final. I have a proposition for you. Her heart stuttered. What kind of proposition? One that benefits us both, he said. I'm traveling to Bucharest within the week. I require a translator. Someone discreet, fluent, and trustworthy. She frowned. You have assistants for that? I prefer someone less connected, he replied. Someone whose loyalty can be built, not bought. The air in the room thickened. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. In return, I will make sure you see your grandmother. Not just a visit, proper medical care, first-class flight, no cost to you. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The offer was too specific, too impossible, too perfectly tailored to the ache she carried every day. Why me? She whispered. His eyes softened, though his tone did not. Because you speak the language of a place I can't trust anymore. And because I don't believe in coincidences. Lena stared at him, heart pounding. You think this is fate? I think, he said slowly, that you answered a call tonight you were meant to answer. Her breath caught. He was serious, utterly serious. It frightened her more than anger would have. I can't, she said quickly, shaking her head. I have a job here, I can't just leave. You can, he interrupted, calm and absolute. And you will, if you truly wish to see her. The words pressed against her like invisible hands. Her instinct screamed to run, but another voice whispered that this might be her only chance. Still, she tried to stand. I appreciate the offer, but sit down, Lena. His tone changed, so quiet it was almost gentle, but so firm that she froze mid-step. He rose from his chair, walking to the window behind her. Chicago glittered beyond the glass, distant and indifferent. I know what it feels like, he said softly, to lose someone before you can say goodbye. The admission startled her. When he turned back, the light caught his face, something human flickering beneath the control. But this is not charity. It's business. You help me, I help you. Lena's mind spun. What kind of business? The kind that stays between us, he replied, and the kind that requires trust. Her throat felt dry. You barely know me. He smiled faintly. I know enough. The 2 men outside the door stood motionless, silent sentinels in the dim hallway. Inside, the air seemed to hum between them. Her fear, his certainty, the strange pull that bound them despite everything rational. Finally, she whispered, I need to think. He nodded, though there was something in his eyes that said he already knew her answer. Do, he said, but don't take too long. She rose slowly, reaching for her coat on the back of the chair. Her hand trembled. She wanted to ask him how he found out about her grandma's condition, but the question felt too dangerous, too obvious. Her heart ached, just thinking of Bunica lying alone in that sterile room, her voice weak but still calling Lena's name. I can't make decisions based on fear, she murmured to herself. Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. Then make them based on truth. She looked up, startled. What truth? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened a drawer, pulled out a slim black folder, and placed it on the desk between them. The paper was smooth, expensive, the kind used for things that mattered. Before you decide, he said, look at this. Lena hesitated, staring at the folder. Her name was printed neatly on a white label, Lena Petran. Her stomach twisted as she reached for it, fingertips brushing the cold surface. Inside, photographs slid into view. They weren't old. They weren't stolen from social media. They were fresh. Her grandmother, pale, fragile, lying in a hospital bed. The date stamped at the corner read that morning. Her vision blurred. The room tilted slightly as Victor's voice reached her through the haze. "I told you," he said quietly. "I make sure of the things I care about." Lena's knees almost gave out. Her hand covered her mouth as she stared at the images, proof that he had eyes where she had none, reach where she had only prayers. And in that moment, one terrifying realization crystallized in her mind. He hadn't offered her a choice. He had already decided. Lena didn't remember walking out of Victor's office. Only the sound of the rain that had started sometime during their conversation, tapping against the restaurant's glass like quiet applause. Her mind was still spinning around the photographs, proof that he had seen her life from angles she never could. That folder had changed everything. It wasn't a proposition anymore. It was a crossroads. Hours passed without feeling real. She packed a small bag in silence, every movement mechanical. Jeans, blouse, passport, the one photograph of Bunica she still carried. Her reflection in the mirror looked like someone else. See, a woman half afraid, half resolved, and wholly uncertain of what waited ahead. When the black car arrived, she stood at the window for a long moment before opening the door. The driver said nothing. He didn't need to. Victor's world didn't explain itself. It simply consumed. The city blurred past in streaks of wet light, Chicago's skyline dissolving into night. Lena pressed her fingers against the cool glass, trying to memorize the way it looked, in case she never saw it again. Her heart ached with the quiet realization that she might not. When they reached the private airfield, the rain had softened to mist. A sleek jet waited on the tarmac, silver against the darkness, its engines humming like something alive. Victor stood near the stairs, coat collar turned up, a figure of control even in the cold wind. He didn't speak as she approached, but his gaze followed her every step. She hesitated at the foot of the stairs. "Do I even have a choice?" she asked quietly. His reply came without hesitation. "Everyone has a choice. Some are just harder to live with." Then, almost gently, he gestured for her to climb. Inside, the jet was too quiet. Polished wood, cream leather, soft lighting that felt expensive in ways she didn't understand. She took the seat across from him, careful not to look directly into those unreadable eyes. The engines rose to a low, steady roar, and soon the city below shrank into a constellation of fading lights. Her stomach turned as the plane lifted, carrying her away from everything she knew. For a while, neither of them spoke. Victor read through papers in a thick black folder. Lena stared out the window, trying to calm the rhythm of her breathing. But silence could be its own kind of interrogation. Every rustle of paper, every clink of glass reminded her that she was sitting across from a man who could find her grandmother in another co. And try without asking permission. Finally, he broke the silence. "You look pale," he said. "I didn't plan to fly across the world tonight," she replied. "That's how the most important journeys begin," he said softly. "Unplanned." She wanted to ask him what kind of man needed a translator for a trip like this, but the words tangled on her tongue. He radiated the kind of calm that didn't invite questions, only quiet obedience. After a while, he set the folder aside and leaned back. "Have some tea," he said, nodding toward the tray beside her. She hesitated, then poured herself a cup, just to have something to hold. The steam curled upward, fragrant and soothing, a strange contrast to the tension beneath her skin. It felt absurd, drinking tea on a private jet with a man whose world was wrapped in secrets. She tried to distract herself by watching the night through the oval window. The world outside was endless darkness, the clouds occasionally illuminated by flashes of distant lightning. She wondered if Bunica was sleeping, if she'd wake to find her granddaughter vanished without explanation. Somewhere behind her, a faint voice spoke in Italian. Lena froze. Victor was on the phone now. his tone calm but sharp-edged, the cadence of a man used to being obeyed. She understood just enough to feel the chill of the conversation. Words like spedizione, stavrescu, and tradimento, shipment, stavrescu, betrayal, slid between the static. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't business. This was something else. Something darker, heavier. When he ended the call, she forced herself to speak. Was that Italian? He looked at her, expression unreadable. You were listening. I couldn't help it. A pause, then quietly. Then I'll have to be more careful. The words weren't a threat, but they sank into her like one. He poured himself a drink, something amber and potent, and for a long time neither spoke again. Outside, thunder rolled far beneath them, distant but persistent. Lena tried to read his posture, his eyes, anything that revealed what she'd stepped into. But Victor Draga was a fortress. Every gesture, every silence, every look calculated to reveal nothing and see everything. Even his politeness felt like a weapon. At one point, he glanced up from his glass. You think too much, he said. She startled, caught. I'm trying to understand. What is there to understand? He asked. That you know everything about me, and I know nothing about you. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Perhaps that's safer, he said. Something inside her snapped. For who, you or me? A rare smile flickered across his lips. Not amusement, but recognition. For both, he said simply. The answer silenced her. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't. He returned to his files, and she returned to the window, where the night stretched endlessly, swallowing the horizon. Hours passed. The hum of the engines became a lullaby she couldn't quite sleep to. At some point, Victor stood and moved closer, setting his glass down beside her. You should rest, he said. I can't, she admitted. My mind won't stop. He regarded her for a long moment before saying, That's because you haven't accepted what's already begun. What's begun? This, he said simply. Whatever this is between us. Her heart tripped over the word us. Before she could respond, the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and the cabin lights flickered. He steadied her without thinking, his hand firm around her wrist. Warm, controlled, unyielding. For a brief, traitorous moment, she didn't want him to let go. When he finally did, the air between them felt charged. She turned away, embarrassed by how her pulse betrayed her. He returned to his seat, as if nothing had happened, but she could feel his attention still on her. Invisible, constant. The jet began its slow descent hours later. The clouds outside broke apart, revealing the faint glow of dawn over Bucharest, golden lights pilling across rivers and rooftops. Lena pressed her palm to the glass, awe and fear mingling in her chest. Home. The word should have brought comfort, but all she felt was unease. Because this wasn't her home anymore. It was his territory, and she was arriving not as a visitor, but as something claimed. The captain's voice murmured through the intercom, announcing the landing. Victor didn't look at her right away. He just fastened his seatbelt, his expression carved from calm stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost intimate. As soon as you step off this jet, Victor said, his eyes meeting hers. There's no going back. Lena stared out at the city rising to meet them, sunlight breaking through the clouds, and realized the sky itself felt like a warning. The jet touched down in Bucharest beneath a sky the color of iron. The windows were beaded with rain, and the hum of the engine seemed to fade into something quieter, heavier. Lena's stomach tightened as the door opened and cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet tarmac and jet fuel. Victor descended first, a dark silhouette framed against the flashing runway lights. He didn't look back to see if she followed. He didn't need to. His authority moved ahead of him like a shadow that swallowed everything in its path. 2 black cars waited at the foot of the stairs. One of the drivers held an umbrella, another opened the rear door without a word. Lena hesitated only a second before Victor's voice, calm, low, commanding, drifted back. Come, Lena. You'll catch cold. Inside the car, she sank into leather so soft it felt unreal. The city unfurled outside the tinted windows, its mixture of ancient churches and modern glass towers glowing faintly through the drizzle. Everything felt foreign, like a dream built on secrets. Victor spoke briefly in Romanian over the phone, his tone clipped. She caught fragments: hospice, security, Stavrescu. Each word landed like a drop of cold water on her nerves. When the convoy reached the hotel, Lena realized it wasn't a hotel at all. The entrance was arched, guarded by two men in dark coats. Inside, the corridors gleamed with marble and soft gold lighting. It felt too quiet, too private, as if the world outside didn't exist. Anka, Victor's poised assistant, met them in the lobby and handed Lena a room key with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Dragan thought you'd prefer to rest first, Anka said smoothly. Your grandmother will be moved tomorrow morning to a private facility just outside the city. You'll visit after the doctors finish their evaluations. Lena's breath caught. Moved? I thought. It's better care, Anka interrupted gently. Trust him. He has already arranged everything. Trust him. The phrase hung in her mind like smoke she couldn't clear away. Her room overlooked the city, high above the lights. The sheets were white, the air faintly perfumed with something expensive and cold. But no matter how soft the surroundings, unease pressed on her chest. She opened her suitcase and froze. Her phone wasn't there. Neither was her charger. She checked every pocket, every zipper. Gone. The next morning, they drove through rolling countryside to a glass-walled facility nestled between pines and mist. Her heart pounded as she entered the sterile hallway, and then stopped altogether when she saw Bunica. Her grandmother lay in a pristine bed, pale but breathing steadily. The machines beeped softly beside her, their rhythm a fragile lullaby. Tears blurred Lena's vision as she rushed to her side. Bunica's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, just a moment, Lena saw recognition and warmth. My little bird, Bunica whispered weakly, her Romanian accent soft and broken. You came back. Lena kissed her hand, trembling. I'm here, Bunica. You're safe. You'll get better now. She didn't mention Victor, didn't mention the jet or the guards or the walls that seemed to move close. Sir, every hour. She only smiled through the ache in her throat because Bunica didn't need the truth. Not now. When Victor appeared at the door, even the nurses seemed to straighten instinctively. He spoke to the doctor in low, confident tones, and though Lena couldn't hear the words, she could feel the weight of them. He was the kind of man who didn't ask for things. He made them happen. Later that night, back at the suite, Lena tried to call her friend from Chicago on the hotel phone. The line clicked and went dead. She tried again, and this time a recorded tone answered in Romanian. This number is restricted. Her chest tightened. She crossed the hall and knocked on Anka's door. The assistant opened it instantly, as though she had been waiting. My phone is missing, Lena said carefully. I can't make outside calls. Anka's gaze softened, almost pitying. You're safe here, Miss Patron, she said quietly. That's what matters. That's not what I asked. The assistant sighed, lowering her voice. You're safe here, as long as you don't try to leave. The words struck like a slap. When Lena returned to her room, the city outside had fallen silent. She sat by the window, the reflection of her face floating above Bucharest's sleeping lights. Safe, they said. Protected. But safety that needed guards and locked phones wasn't safety at all. It was gilded captivity. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breath. The room felt too still, the air too thick. Every sound, the hum of the vent, the creak of the floor, made her flinch. She told herself she was overreacting, that Victor had simply taken precautions, that everything would make sense in the morning. But as midnight stretched toward dawn, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A sharp knock echoed through the quiet suite. Lena turned, heart pounding, as the door swung open. Victor stood in the doorway, rein still clinging to his coat. her passport in his hand. His eyes caught hers, cold and unreadable. "Looking for this?" he said softly. Lena's breath cogged back in her throat as Victor stepped into the room. The air seemed to change with him, heavier, charged, alive with something unspoken. Droplets of rain clung to his dark hair, glimmering like glass under the soft light. He set her passport down on the desk between them, his gaze never leaving her face. "You shouldn't keep this," he said quietly, his tone smooth as smoke. "It's too easy to lose things here." Lena swallowed, unsure whether it was a warning or a kindness. "You took it," she said softly. "I kept it safe." His lips curved slightly, but there was no humor in it. "You have a habit of running from things, don't you?" Her pulse quickened. "And you have a habit of keeping people where you want them." A faint shadow passed through his eyes, admiration or irritation, she couldn't tell. Then he turned away, as though dismissing her words. "Tomorrow, you'll attend a meeting with me. You speak Italian better than most of my men, and you'll translate when I ask." She wanted to refuse, to demand her freedom, but something in his voice made resistance feel impossible. It wasn't just authority. It was gravity. When he left, she stood in the stillness he'd left behind, her passport gleaming dully under the lamp. The small book felt heavier than it should, a symbol of freedom now locked in his control. The next morning came draped in fog. Victor's car was waiting. Inside, the silence between them was thick, but not cold. He gave her a glance that was both assessing and unreadable, his fingers resting casually on the steering wheel. At the office tower, his men waited in crisp suits, nodding respectfully as she passed. She translated conversations about imports, logistics, shipping manifests, words that sounded ordinary, but carried a weight she didn't understand. Each phrase felt like a thread connecting her deeper into Victor's world. He listened intently while. And she spoke, his gaze fixed on her mouth, not her notes. Once, when she hesitated on a word, his hand brushed lightly over hers as if to steady her. The touch burned through her like lightning. Hours blurred. When the meeting ended, Victor dismissed the others but told her to stay. The office windows looked out over Bucharest, endless lights against the evening sky. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. "You did well," he said. "It's just translation," she murmured, her voice unsteady. He leaned closer, his voice a low murmur. "No, Lena, you read more than words. You read people. That's rare." She didn't know whether it was praise or manipulation, but she felt it, the way his approval slid under her skin, leaving warmth where she shouldn't have wanted any. Later that week, he took her to a tailor. Silk, satin, emerald velvet, fabrics that brushed against her skin like whispers. She protested, but he only smiled faintly. "You can't walk beside me looking like a waitress," he said. "You're part of my image now." When she returned to her room that night, a small black box waited on her bed. Inside lay an emerald necklace, deep green, the color of forests before a storm. The note beside it was written in his handwriting. "It belonged to my mother. It suits you better." Her fingers trembled as she lifted it, feeling its cold weight. The gems glinted under the light, beautiful and suffocating all at once. It wasn't just a gift. It was a collar made of luxury, soft, gleaming, and inescapable. The following evening, she accompanied Victor to a gala at one of Bucharest's oldest estates. The halls glittered with chandeliers and laughter that never reached anyone's eyes. He guided her through the crowd with a hand on the small of her back, protective, possessive, claiming. Everyone seemed to know him. Men in suits greeted him with cautious smiles. Women whispered behind jeweled hands. When they looked at Lena, curiosity sharpened into envy. She stood beside him, smiling politely, feeling like a painting hung in someone else's gallery. As the night deepened, she began to notice things. Quick glances exchanged between strangers, the subtle tension whenever Victor's name was spoken. Whispers followed him like smoke. Victor moved away briefly to speak to an older man near the balcony, leaving her alone for the first time. That's when she felt a presence at her shoulder, a voice, low and close enough to brush her ear. "Miss Petron," the stranger murmured. She turned. The man was elegant, sharply dressed, his smile too smooth. "I'm Mirsha Stavrescu," he said. "We've never met, but I've heard about you." Her chest tightened at the name. She'd heard it before, in Victor's phone calls, in whispered warnings. Mirsha's gaze swept over her, not cruel but curious, like someone studying a fragile artifact. "He moves fast, doesn't he?" he said quietly. "A necklace? A new dress. Next comes the cage you won't see until it closes." Lena stiffened, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know him." A faint smirk curved his lips. "Don't I?" He leaned in, his breath brushing her skin, his tone a velvet threat. "You don't know what kind of man he really is." Before Lena could respond, Victor's reflection appeared in the mirrored wall behind her. His eyes locked on Mirsha, his expression dark and deadly calm. The moment Victor's eyes locked on Mircea's reflection, the air in the ballroom froze. Conversations dulled to a hum, champagne glasses stilled midair. Victor crossed the floor with that slow, deliberate stride that sent unease rippling through the crowd. His expression was calm, but his calm was a lie. It was the surface of a storm. Mircea smiled as Victor approached, unruffled, the picture of polished defiance. "Victor," he greeted smoothly, voice dripping with false warmth. "You should really keep better company. Some of us like to talk to your new translator." Victor's hand brushed Lena's arm, guiding her subtly behind him. His voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "Talk to her again, and you'll forget how to speak." The two men exchanged a look that said everything words could not. Old history, buried grudges, unhealed wounds. Then Victor turned away without another word, his arm firm around Lena's waist as he led her out of the gala. In the car, silence pressed down like fog. Lena wanted to ask who Mirsha was, what had happened between them, but Victor's expression made her stay still. His jaw was clenched, the vein in his temple pulsing faintly under the passing streetlights. The next morning, the city woke to chaos. News spread quickly. Government agents raided one of Victor's Bucharest offices, seizing files, freezing accounts, dragging employees into questioning. It was all over the local news feeds, headlines flashing with words like fraud, embezzlement, investigation. Lena watched from the corner of Victor's private study as he stood by the window, phone in hand, voice low and deadly calm. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught fragments. Stavrescu, leaked documents, find who signed them. His assistant Anka entered with a folder, her usual composure cracking at the edges. "The police claim the papers came from our accounts department," she said. "But they're forgeries. Every signature." Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Of course they are," he said softly. Mirsha never had the imagination for truth. Then he turned his gaze on Lena. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something colder, something that made her skin prickle. "You were there when he spoke to you," he said. "He wanted you to carry the poison for him. He wanted you scared, distrustful." "I don't," she began, but he cut her off with a quiet wave of his hand. "Doesn't matter now," he said. "You're part of the picture whether you like it or not." "Part of what picture?" she asked, voice trembling. "Part of the problem," he said. Then after a pause that sent chills down her spine, he added, "And part of my protection plan." Before she could ask what he meant, he was already moving, issuing orders in Romanian, gathering files, giving instructions to his men. Within an hour, the suite was stripped of personal belongings. Cars waited outside. Lena barely had time to pack before Anka handed her a new passport. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. Anka hesitated, her gaze darting toward Victor. "Somewhere safe," she said. The flight felt endless. The world below turned from city lights to snow-covered wilderness. When they landed, the silence was absolute. mountains rising like walls around them, clouds curling over the peaks. The estate was vast, built of stone and glass, perched on the edge of nowhere. "This is temporary," Victor told her as they entered the grand echoing hall. "Until I fix what Stavrescu started." Lena's grandmother was brought soon after, carefully transferred by a medical team. Seeing her settled soothed Lena's nerves only slightly. Everything else, the guards, the remote location, the constant watch, felt like a golden cage disguised as safety. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Victor worked from his study, calls and meetings stretching into the night. Sometimes Lena caught glimpses of him, pacing before the fire, his shirt sleeves rolled up, tension carved into his shoulders. Other times he disappeared for hours, returning colder, quieter, harder. Their paths crossed less, but when they did, the space between them felt charged, an unspoken current humming beneath every word. Once, as he passed her in the hall, his fingers brushed hers. Just a moment, accidental maybe, but it left her breathless, heart tangled between fear and something she didn't want to name. One night, snow fell heavy against the windows, muffling every sound. The estate was dark, except for the faint light under Victor's study door. Lena couldn't sleep. The unease from the day, whispers for Kay. Anka, guarded glances from the staff, twisted inside her. Finally, curiosity overpowered caution. She pushed open the study door. The room smelled of smoke and whiskey, papers scattered across. The desk, the fire half burned down. She meant only to tidy up, maybe find a clue about what was happening. But when she opened the drawer to place a pen inside, her hand froze. There, beneath neatly folded documents, lay a gun. Sleek, polished, waiting. Her reflection shimmered in the metal like a warning, and beneath it, a photograph. She lifted it with trembling fingers. The image was old, faded. Two men standing side by side in black suits. One was unmistakably Victor's father. The other, her breath caught. It was her own father. The edges of the photo trembled in her grip as the firelight flickered across it. What did it mean? How could her father, the quiet man who died before she was 10, be part of Victor's world? Footsteps sounded outside the door, heavy, slow, deliberate. Lena barely had time to hide the photo before the handle turned, and Victor stepped inside, eyes sharp, voice low. "What?" he asked softly. "Are you doing in my office at this hour?" The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded louder than any shout. The soft light from the fire caught the sharp angles of his face, shadowing his jaw and the storm brewing in his eyes. Lena froze, the photo still hidden in her trembling hand. She could feel her pulse in her throat. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, her voice too thin, too careful. "I just wanted some air." Victor's gaze flicked from her to the open drawer, then back to her face. "You chose my office for air?" he asked, tone low, skeptical. She swallowed hard. "The light was on. I thought you were here." He walked closer, every step measured, silent. The heat from the fireplace brushed against her back, but her skin felt cold. "Tell me," he said, stopping inches from her. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Her hand clenched the photographs, so tightly it bent at the edges. "I wasn't looking for anything," she whispered. He reached past her and pushed the drawer shut. The faint thud made her flinch. "Lying doesn't suit you, Lena." The way he said her name, quiet, edged with something dangerous, made her chest ache and her stomach twist. Victor stepped back, studying her face as if trying to read a language he almost recognized. Then, without another word, he turned away and poured himself a drink. "Why do you have a picture of my father?" she asked suddenly, the question bursting out before fear could silence her. The glass in his hand froze midair. The sound of the fire filled the pause, crackling softly between them. "Your father," he repeated slowly. "So you saw it." Lena's breath hitched. "Yes." He set the glass down without drinking. "That photograph isn't yours to see." Her eyes burned with anger now, fear mixing with defiance. He was my father. You can't just hide something like that from me. Victor turned, his face unreadable. I wasn't hiding it. I was protecting you. From what? He didn't answer immediately. He crossed the room to the window, the reflection of firelight glinting off the glass. Snow fell outside, silent and endless. When I was a boy, he began quietly, my father trusted one man in business. Your father. They built everything together. But when the world turned, when the wrong people wanted power, one of them betrayed the other. Lena's stomach dropped. You think my father betrayed yours? He faced her then, eyes dark, steady. I don't know. The truth was buried with both of them. But that picture, it's the last proof they ever stood on the same side. Her heart pounded, confusion clouding her thoughts. Why keep it? Why hide it here? Because, he said, voice softening, some ghosts are safer locked away. The tension eased for a heartbeat, but only sudden. She could see the exhaustion beneath his composure, the faint tremor in his hand, the hollowness behind his eyes. You don't trust anyone, do you? She asked quietly. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Trust is for people who can afford to lose. Their eyes met, the silence thick again, but this time it wasn't just tension. It was something heavier, almost tender. She saw in him not just danger, but loneliness, and for a second she forgot she was supposed to be afraid. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with truth. You scare me sometimes, Victor, but not because of what you could do to me, because of what I might start feeling. He looked at her for a long moment, the mask slipping just enough for warmth to flicker beneath. Then don't feel, he murmured. It complicates survival. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. You'll stay out of my office from now on, he said, softer now, almost regretful. She nodded, unable to speak. When the door shut behind him, she exhaled shakily and sank into the nearest chair. The photograph lay on the desk, still bent from her grip. She stared at it for a long time, at the two men side by side, smiling as if nothing dark ever existed between them. Maybe Victor was right. Maybe some ghosts were better left buried. But that night, as the wind howled across the Alps and the estate settled into uneasy silence, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't finished with either of them. Just before dawn, Lena woke to the faint sound of footsteps outside her door, slow, careful, deliberate, and a voice she didn't recognize whispering in Romanian, "Get ready. He doesn't know we're here yet." The morning after the sleepless night was heavy with silence. The air outside the chalet was thin and cold, pressing against the glass as snow drifted in slow spirals. Lena hadn't slept. Her thoughts kept circling around the sound she'd heard outside her room, that faint voice in the dark. She tried to convince herself it had been the wind, but her heart refused to believe it. When she finally popped out into the hall, Victor was already waiting, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. "Come with me," he said simply, and there was no invitation in his tone, only command. They descended to a lower floor she hadn't seen before, a place that looked nothing like the luxurious suites upstairs. The walls were lined with monitors and maps. Men in dark clothes moved silently between computer screens. It was the first time Lena saw the machinery of Victor's empire stripped bare. No pretense, no illusion, just control. "This is what you wanted to understand, isn't it?" Victor said quietly. "What I really do." Lena didn't answer. Her throat tightened as she looked at the live feeds, trucks crossing borders, coded messages, numbers shifting across screens. It wasn't a business empire. It was a shadow kingdom. He watched her reaction, his hands clasped behind his back. "You should know what kind of man you're dealing with before you decide whether to stay under my protection." "Protection?" she whispered. "You mean captivity?" Victor turned to her then, eyes glinting like steel. "If I wanted you captive, you wouldn't be standing here. You'd be in one of those rooms upstairs, locked and guarded. But you're not. You're here because I want you to understand why I can't let you go. Lena felt her pulse thudding painfully. Why? Why me? He exhaled slowly, as if the answer cost him something. Because the night you answered that call, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. Your voice. It reminded me of her. She blinked. Of who? He stepped closer, and the space between them seemed to vibrate with tension. My mother. Before she died, she sang in Italian. The same accent, the same softness in her tone. That night, when I heard you speak, I thought I was hearing a ghost. Lena stared at him, stunned. She wanted to laugh, to deny it, but something in his face stopped her. His confession wasn't romantic. It was raw, stripped of charm, full of something far more dangerous than affection. Since that night, he continued, voice low, I've had you, watched, protected. You became part of something I couldn't control, and I don't like losing control. Lena took a step back, her stomach twisting. That's not love, Victor, that's obsession. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but obsession keeps people alive in my world. She felt a chill race down her spine. You could have let me go. I could have, he admitted, moving past her to the window. But then you'd be dead. Mirsha made sure of that the moment he saw you by my side. He doesn't forgive weaknesses, and he believes you are mine. Lena turned away, trying to steady her breathing. The truth pressed on her like the cold glass, every word cutting through the illusion she'd been clinging to. She had thought she could reason with him, understand him. But now, all she saw was the trap she'd walked into willingly. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. And Bunica? Was she just leverage to keep me here? He turned sharply. No, I made sure she was safe. I swore that to you, didn't I? Something in his tone made her look at him again. For a brief, unguarded second, she saw the man beneath the armor, the flicker of guilt, of something human and broken. I never wanted to hurt you, Lena, he said quietly, but the things I've done to protect what's mine, you wouldn't forgive them. Then tell me, she said, almost pleading. Tell me everything. And he did. For hours he spoke, about the shipments through the ports of Constanza, the politicians who took his money, the alliances built on blood and lies. He told her about his father, a man as ruthless as legend, and how that legacy still chained him. Lena listened in silence, her mind a storm of disbelief and reluctant understanding. She should have hated him. Every word should have pushed her further away, but instead she felt herself pulled toward him, not by reason, but by the dangerous gravity of his vulnerability. When he finally stopped speaking, the room felt smaller, darker. You're free to judge me, he said softly, but not to leave. Lena met his eyes, anger and sorrow tangled in her chest. You can't decide that for me. Watch me, he murmured. The air between them burned with tension, something unspoken, electric. She turned away first, afraid of what she might do if she didn't. Hours later, she walked through the silent corridors of the estate. The snow outside had deepened, muffling every sound. She stopped by her grandmother's window, the faint glow of the clinic across the courtyard offering a small comfort. She needed to see Bunica in the morning, needed to believe that at least one part of her world still made sense. As she lay in bed, the echo of Victor's words haunted her. You're part of my protection plan now. She hated that a part of her wanted to believe it meant safety. The next morning, Lena pushed open the door to Bunica's room and froze. The bed was empty. The sheets were freshly changed, the monitors gone. Even the chart at the foot of the bed had vanished. Only the faint indentation on the pillow remained, as if someone had been there just hours ago. Her grandmother was gone, and so was every record she'd ever existed in that place. The silence in the clinic was suffocating. Lena stood frozen, staring at the empty bed that had once held her grandmother. The sheets were crisp, the room spotless, as if Bunica had never been there at all. A chill slid through her bones, heavier than fear. She stumbled backward, her voice breaking the quiet. Bunica? Her whisper vanished into the sterile air. Footsteps thundered in the hall. Within seconds, Victor appeared in the doorway, followed by 2 guards. One look at Lena's face told him everything. "She's gone," Lena said, her voice barely a sound. "She's just gone." Victor's jaw tightened, his eyes sweeping the room like a predator scanning for signs of a trap. "Get the head nurse," he barked. "Now!" The guards moved instantly. He crossed the room, pulled open drawers, checked behind curtains, every gesture precise and controlled, but beneath that composure was a storm. Lena clutched the bed frame. "You said she was safe." "She was," he replied coldly, "until someone wanted to hurt me through her." Tears stung her eyes. "Then why does it feel like you already knew this could happen?" He froze, his back to her. "Because I always know what my enemies are capable of." She wanted to scream, to demand more, but his expression warned her that this wasn't the moment. Within minutes, the clinic transformed into chaos, phones ringing, orders flying, black cars roaring to life outside. Victor's empire was mobilizing. Lena followed as he moved through the corridors, issuing commands in rapid Romanian and Italian. The men obeyed without question, vanishing into the storm outside. "You think Mircea did this?" she said finally. "I don't think," Victor replied. "I know." They drove through the night, sleek SUVs slicing through the snowy mountain roads, headlights cutting pale arcs through the darkness. The landscape blurred by, silent and endless. Lena's hands trembled in her lap. She couldn't tell if it was the cold or what she was about to face. Victor sat beside her, his profile lit by the dim dashboard glow. He hadn't spoken in miles. His silence was sharper than anger. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere Mircea thinks I won't come," he said quietly. "He's wrong." The road wound down into a valley where the world seemed to hold its breath. When they finally stopped, Lena saw it. The silhouette of an old monastery rising from the fog, its walls fractured and dark against the snow. Victor stepped out first, his coat snapping in the wind. Lena followed, her boots crunching against the frozen ground. Her heart raced so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. Inside, the monastery smelled of stone and dust and memories long buried. Candles flickered weakly on crumbling altars, and in the center of the vast hollow space stood Mircea Stavrescu. He looked almost casual, hands tucked into his coat pockets, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Victor Dragan," he said, his voice echoing off the ancient walls. "I was wondering when the king would come for his ghost." Victor's men fanned out instantly, guns ready, but Victor raised a hand, stopping them. "Where is she?" he asked. Mircea's smile widened. "Safe, for now." Lena stepped forward before Victor could stop her. "What do you want from us?" "Us?" Mircea chuckled softly. "No, my dear, I don't want anything from you. I only want him to see what he's done." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Enough games." Mircea's voice dropped to a low whisper that carried like a curse. "He didn't save your grandmother, Lena. He bought her." The words struck like a blade. Lena blinked, shaking her head. "What are you talking about?" Mircea turned toward her, his tone almost tender. The hospice in Romania was failing, full of dying old souls no one could afford to save. Until your Victor stepped in, paid every doctor, every nurse, every debt, but not for charity, for access, to you. Lena felt the world tilt. She looked to Victor, searching for denial, for anger, for anything. But he said nothing. He only stared at Mircea, his silence heavy, his face unreadable. "That's not true," she whispered. Mircea laughed softly. "Then ask him. Ask him what her life was worth in euros." Her throat closed. She turned toward Victor. "Tell me he's lying." The silence stretched like a wound. Finally Victor spoke, barely above a whisper. "I did what I had to do." It was enough. The truth crashed over her like ice water. Her chest ached, her vision blurred. She felt herself step back, as though the distance might save her from the weight of what she now knew. You used her, she said. I protected her, he replied. You wouldn't have listened to me otherwise. Don't twist this, she cried. You bought my grandmother's life to control mine. The tension in the room snapped. Victor's men shifted uneasily, their fingers brushing their triggers. Mircea smiled, stepping closer to the altar. And that, he said softly, is why your empire will fall, Victor. You built it on love disguised as power. Victor moved then, fast, violent. He grabbed Mircea by the collar, slamming him against the stone wall. The echo thundered through the monastery. You took her? Victor hissed. Where is she? Mircea only smiled through gritted teeth. Too late. Lena felt her knees weaken. What did you do to her? Mircea looked at her with something almost like pity. You'll see soon enough. The air grew colder. The candles flickered, and then, somewhere in the dark, a single gunshot split the silence. Lena screamed. The world erupted. Shouting, movement, chaos. She saw Victor's body twist, his men rushing forward, Mircea vanishing into the smoke that followed. Someone grabbed her arm, pulling her down, shouting her name. Everything blurred. The stone floor rose up to meet her. The sound of her own heartbeat drowned out the rest. And then, nothing. A single gunshot echoed through the monastery, followed by silence. When the smoke cleared, Victor was gone, and Mircea's laughter still lingered in the dark. When Lena opened her eyes, the world was white. The ceiling above her was the same pale shade as the snow beyond the windows. Her breath came shallow and sharp, the scent of antiseptic filling her lungs. Somewhere far away, machines hummed softly, a steady rhythm pulling her back from the edge of darkness. Her body felt heavy, her mind fogged with pain. She tried to move, but the effort sent a flash of fire through her chest. Slowly, memories began to piece themselves together. The monastery, the gunshot, the echo of Mircea's laughter. Then Victor, collapsing into chaos, and her own voice screaming his name before everything faded. Now she was here again, back in the Swiss Alps, back in his world. The door opened quietly. Light spilled into the room, warm against the cold, white stillness. Victor stepped inside. He looked different, paler, slower, his left arm bandaged and a faint line of bruises tracing his jaw. But his eyes, those eyes were the same, sharp, unreadable, haunted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the snowstorm outside filled the silence between them. You're awake, he said softly, almost like he didn't believe it. Lena swallowed hard. Her throat was dry, her voice fragile. Where's Bunica? He stepped aside, and only then did she notice another bed across the room, small, surrounded by medical equipment. Bunica lay there, motionless but alive, her breathing shallow yet steady. She's safe, Victor said quietly. They found her in an abandoned truck outside the border, hypothermic but alive. Lena's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. Relief flooded her body like warmth breaking through frost. She tried to sit up, but Victor was already beside her, pressing a steady hand against her shoulder. Don't, he murmured. You need rest. Her voice trembled. You were shot. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. It's nothing new. She studied him, the exhaustion carved into his features, the way his fingers trembled slightly when he reached for her blanket. For the first time, she saw not just power in him, but pain, the price he carried for everything he controlled. How long have I been here? She asked. 2 days. And Mircea? Victor's gaze darkened. Gone, for now. Lena looked toward the window. Snow was falling thick and slow, blurring the mountains into a gray haze. The sight felt both peaceful and suffocating. Why am I here again? She whispered. Victor's voice lowered. Because I couldn't let you go. Her bra, Eth caught. He turned away, walking toward the other side of the room. You want the truth? You've always wanted it, even when you were afraid to ask. I'm listening, she said quietly. He faced her again, and for a moment she saw him unmasked, stripped of the armor he always wore. His voice carried the weight of something long kept buried. Everything I did, the calls, the investigation, the trip to Romania, all of it was because I knew if I let you walk out of that restaurant that night, I'd never see you again. Lena's pulse quickened. So you made sure I couldn't. He didn't deny it. I've lived surrounded by people who want me dead or want what I own. You were the first thing I didn't want to lose. Not for business, not for power. Just because I needed to know you existed in my world. She closed her eyes, her heart twisting painfully. You lied to me. Yes, he said simply. Because telling you the truth would have sent you running before I ever had the chance to make you stay. The room fell into a deep, fragile silence. Lena turned her head toward her grandmother, still unconscious beneath the white sheets. You used her to keep me here. Victor's voice softened. I saved her so you wouldn't hate me completely. She wanted to be angry, to scream, to curse him for everything he'd taken, but the fury tangled with something else, something far more dangerous. He had torn apart her freedom, yet somehow he had also become the only place she could no longer imagine living without. Lena's eyes met his again. You think this is love? I think it's the only kind I know, he said. The truth of it broke something open inside her. There was no pretense in his words, no attempt to justify himself. He wasn't pretending to be good, only to be honest, and somehow that made it harder to breathe. The wind outside howled against the windows, the snow falling thicker now. Victor moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I tried to let you go once, he said. You came back to me in every dream, every shadow. I'm done pretending I can and live without you. Lena's throat ached. And if I want to leave? His eyes met hers, steady, burning, unflinching. Then I'll follow. For a long time, they stayed like that, the wounded man and the woman who should have hated him. The quiet hum of the machines beside them was the only proof they were still alive. Finally, Lena rose carefully, crossing the room until she stood by the window. The world beyond was a sea of white, endless, silent, unforgiving. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, not the invisible waitress she once was, but someone who had walked through fire and come out changed. Behind her, Victor's voice broke the stillness. Now you know everything. Lena didn't move, her fingers pressed lightly against the cold glass. Tell me, Lena. His voice lowered, that same dangerous tenderness curling through every word. Do you still want to leave? The room felt suddenly too small, the air too heavy. Her pulse echoed in her ears. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Her eyes met his, full of storm and surrender, of love and defiance, and the question hung between them like a heartbeat suspended in air. Lena stood by the window, snow drifting behind her like ghosts of everything she'd lost. Victor waited in silence, the question still between them. Then she turned toward him, her expression unreadable. And the story ended before her answer ever came.